Let's start taking our seats. We'll call this meeting to order. We've got our clerk in place. All righty. Okay. Calling to order the Fort Ord Reese Authority regular meeting for Friday, July 13th, 2018. If Colonel Ford would lead us in the pledge. Oh, we still don't have a flag.
Visualizing the flag.
It's on your arm. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I understand the veterans absconded with the flag at a previous meeting. Yeah, those pesky veterans. Okay, Michael, we have acknowledgments, announcements, and correspondence.
Yes, Chair, the representative from the Base Realignment and Closure Office is not able to be here today. He's meeting with regulators and preparing for tomorrow's community involvement workshop, which is going to be an open house and a 90-minute guided bus tour of the former Fort Ord and the Inland Range area. This is going to be quite a tour tomorrow because they're going to go up to Wildcat Ridge tomorrow, and they're also going to do a little run through on the fire line, the fire break line that has been established on the base. I know representatives from Supervisor Parker's office and two councilman offices as well have asked why were the fire breaks happening. That's because we anticipate a burn this year. So if you're interested, that's going to be tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock at the BRAC office, and there'll be a tour of other parts of the impact area as they go up towards Wildcat Ridge, and you can find out details by going to www.fortordcleanup.com. This is technically Colonel Ford's first meeting. The last one was a half meeting, and so we're acknowledging the Colonel's first meeting. And I'd also like to make a note about the Association of Defense Communities Conference, which was last month. Again, we had two board members that joined us in our review of what's going on in Washington, D.C., and that was Council Member Ramers from Carmel and Mayor Carbone from the city of Sand City. I think each of them probably can comment more on their experiences than I would, but the conference was illuminating with respect to lots of opportunities for us here at Fort Ord. There were a couple of sessions particularly that talked about the future for drone technology and opportunity zones, with which we have a pretty significant one on the base in the city of Marina, for the record. But I'd leave it to Marianne and Jan to make comments.
I'll go first. So the conference was very interesting and opened my eyes in regards to the community surrounding defense facility closures. While in Washington, it was important to hear the Department of Defense's opinion on how invaluable it was to them to work with cities as partners. So on the private side, along bases, so with cities, with solutions and partnerships. They spoke about gray water, power, and downsizing of bases, and how local leaders can work with increases or decreases of there's base closures, and how both future missions may line up. Opportunity zones was a main topic, and I have taken many notes, so I still have yet to process those, and so if anyone is interested, I'm happy to share those with anyone at the next FORA meeting. I'd like to take my hat off to the executive director, Hulemard, as he's very well known in DC and introduced us to many people there. In regards to opportunity zones, they could help, they said they can help with infrastructure, sewer, and water costs. They said that it wasn't prohibited. And in these opportunity zones, there's, with the new market, there's tax credits. There was some exclusion to businesses, so and that was no sin businesses. So no lotto sales, cannabis wasn't listed. Let's see, what else? So I have more in my notes, I just have not went through those till this morning. So, and then another thing was they were looking at drones, and later this year there may be some legislation where you won't, as it is now, to have a drone go at any distance, they need an aircraft to follow behind it. And they're saying that with this new legislation, it opens opportunities to different delivery services where they can fly from and do deliveries to different locations with bigger craft or drones. Let's see, something else was the Defense Department's also looking at better nutrition for their defense, so for the soldiers, so they're looking at that. So I think that's about it for now, but I'll have more notes written out so you can read them a little bit better at the next meeting. Thank you.
Ms. Vernon.
First, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to attend the Association of Defense Communities National Summit in Washington. We didn't see much of Washington, D.C. We did get to see the Capitol and the
Supreme Court.
Supreme Court, thank you. I usually can speak a bit more succinctly, but in any case, there were about 800 attendees and extensive participation by the Department of Defense, the defense communities, and industries across the country. And the land use authorities, such as FORA, had several workshops just of our own, and they were very, very interesting. And one of the own consultants from here, Christy Reimers, was there. And as a side, I learned that I knew her mother. She and I were acquainted in our other lives in the Bay Area, so that was a fascinating thing to find out. I too was fascinated by the drone exploration and what's going to happen there. And right now, the fact that another plane has to follow the drone in an extended distance doesn't make them very practical, but that probably will change in future as the research goes forward. And it's an opportunity for economic development on the bases. And so that is something that I think we'll all be looking forward to hearing more about. We aren't the only ones who've dealt with contaminants. I learned two new acronyms, but I'm not going to even try to pronounce them right now. PFOA and PFOS. Yes, okay. And they are water soluble, but that's the problem because they do get into the soil in the areas and they've come from the, as I understand, from the fires, retardants that they use to put out fires. So that's been a problem for some of the agencies that we don't need to worry about here. The opportunity zones, as Marianne said, were very, very interesting, and it was just fascinating to be in these sessions and learn and talk to so many different people. Very difficult to walk across any of the rooms with individuals there with Mr. Hulemard. If you want to get to anywhere quickly, you need to take a side road or something or another way because he's so well so much appreciated, and everyone wanted to stop and talk, and he was wonderful introducing us as well. And I just must say that while this is not a perfect world at Fort Ord, it certainly is highly regarded, and when you recognize what has happened on this very vast piece of property in the last few years, last number of years, FORA is a very successful operation, and we have the administration to be thankful for that. So it was very, very nice to be a part of that exercise. Thank you.
I think I'd like to just quickly note some of the outcome of that is I think the City of Marina is going to be able to take advantage of because the drone work, there's several others in other parts of the country like to potentially partner with Marina and using their airport as part of a testing for new drone technology. And I know Marina has got some real great opportunities associated with that. And I think the City of Monterey Representative Dan Albert also was at the conference.
Okay, well, very good. Did you want to share any of your insights, Mr. Albert?
I just wanted to mention one thing that was important to the city of Monterey is when's the next BRAC And they made a comment that it's probably not until 2023 or at least later. And so that's good for the city of Monterey. But another interesting thing was the mission resiliency about, especially when it comes to renewable energy on our bases and how important that is. And so we were looking at it as hopefully in a DLI or a naval postgraduate school to increase our efficiencies in energy.
And one of the themes that have been, running through all those conferences is the ability for the bases to be ready, the readiness factor, which includes water and a lot of the utilities that we take for granted. And I don't think anyone takes water for granted around here, but it's a very important piece in determining BRAC selections is readiness. Okay, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a closed session.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board and public. Item 4 today, closed session 4A, conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A and D1, Keep Fort Ord Wild versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority. It's Monterey County Superior Court case number 17CV4540. That's pending litigation. 4B is also conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A and D1, Marina Community Partners LLC versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Monterey County Superior Court case number 18CV871, also pending litigation. And 4C is public employment, Government Code Section 549.7B, the executive officer evaluation.
The faster we come to order, the faster we can get out of here. All right, Authority Council, will you read us out of closed session, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the board and public. The council met in closed session on item 4A,
Yeah.
conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A, D1, Keep Fort Ord Wild versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority. There's nothing to report after having heard the status of the case. 4B, conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A and D1, Marina Community Partners LLC versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority. The board also heard from counsel as to the status of that case, and there's nothing to report out. And same with 4C, public employment, the executive officer evaluation. There's nothing to report out on that.
Very good. At this time, we'll go ahead and have a roll call.
Supervisor Parker. Here. Supervisor Phillips. Here. Supervisor Adams. Here. Mayor Edelen. Here. Councilmember O'Connell. Here. Councilmember Morton. Here. Councilmember Albert. Here. Mayor Rubio.
Here.
Councilmember Alexander. Mayor Carbone. Here. Mayor Gunter. Councilmember Garfield.
Here.
Councilmember Reimers.
Here.
Marina P. Nicole Hollingsworth. Erica Parker. Debbie Hale. Dr. Diffenbaugh. Here. Steve Matarazzo. Andre Lewis. He's here. Oh, I'm sorry. Dr. Ochoa, you have arrived.
They're twins, it's hard to tell them apart.
Right. Colonel Gregory Ford, Bill Collins, Dr. Triblee, Lisa Reinheimer, and Dr. Moore.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the next item on the agenda is a consent agenda, which consists of approved June 8th, 2018 meeting minutes, Administrative Committee, Veterans Issues Advisory Committee, Environmental Services Cooperative Agreement Quarterly Report, the revised 2018 board meeting schedule, purchase authorizations, dues and memberships, and public correspondence to the board. Is there anyone on the board that would like to pull anything for further consideration? Anybody in the public? Any public comment on the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move approval.
To the motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next item is a business item. Michael, stockade building removal and contract approvals.
Yes, Peter Said will provide a brief presentation with regard to this. We're requesting that the board provide the executive officer with authority to solicit and execute contracts to move ahead with the stockade building removal.
Mr. Said.
I'm just going to speak loudly because this is tape for you guys. Last July, we did the same thing. We brought forward a proposal to do multiple contract surplus two. And in doing so, we've been able to accomplish a number of things. We've got the vegetation removed, the surplus two. We hired the biospecies control. We have the falconer out there. We have the prevailing wage monitor hired. We've been moving forward on that. And I'm happy to report that we've issued a notice of intent to award for the abatement, and we expect that to start in August. We would like to do the same thing for the Marina Stockade and having the executive officer authorized to do multiple contracts up to the CIP approved budget level of 4.2 million. Here you see an estimated contract breakdown for each item. The biospecies control all the way through prevailing wage monitoring and management reserve, and we're asking that you, or we recommend that you authorize the executive officer to solicit and execute contracts necessary for stockade building removal, not to exceed $4.2 million. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Said? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this item?
Ron Cheshire with the Monterey Santa Cruz Building Trades Council. In order to save some money on the project, the building trades would be glad to sit down and consult with FORA in regards to the monitoring and compliance of prevailing wage. And we can do it for a lot less than $60,000. And I guarantee you that project will be squeaky clean. Thank you.
Something to consider. Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Any discussion? There's a motion to approve, a second. Any other discussion on the second? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Oh boy, we're taking down some derelict buildings. Yay. Okay, Mr. Said, surface work order for General Jim Moore Boulevard.
Excellent. So I'm excited to take buildings down too. It's been a year-long effort, and I'm looking forward to that. This is a little bit different. This has to do with the Master Services Agreement. As you will recall, last November in 2017, the Master Services Agreement with Cregan and D'Angelo Engineers ended, and we replaced it with a Master Services Agreement with Whitson Engineers so that they might be able to do future work. That Master Services Agreement had four major areas of work that had to do with doing a background evaluation on a number of the roads, as well as some of the biological involved, a work order for South Boundary roadway improvements, Giggling roadway improvements, and for utilities, MEC, and public outreach. Those were the four major work areas. During Service Work Order 1 and doing the background evaluation, we had Whitson and Engineers and Denise Duffy and Associates do a number of actions as they looked at the various documents and looked at some of the biological issues out on site. And they identified the need for an additional service work order.
and that's for the General Jim Moore Boulevard intersection with South Boundary Road. And let me go into some of the background on why there's a need for this. So the General Jim Moore General Jim Moore Boulevard and South Boundary Road actually had its own environmental assessment and initial study that was performed. Here's the text out of the project description. It says the proposed roadway, General Jim Moore, will include the construction of new intersections at South Boundary Road, Delray Oaks, Resort, Hillby Avenue, San Pablo Avenue. That has been, most of those intersections have been constructed, but South Boundary Road was the last intersection that has not been constructed. So a little bit of a timeline on that, going back to the General Jim Moore project. Once the EIS was completed, there was a mitigated negative declaration that was completed, and that was done in 2005. And in September of the same year, it was brought forward to this board, and this board approved the project findings, thereby approving the CEQA. And that CEQA was completed, or for the most part, or it was completed by filing a notice of determination on February 24, 2006. Between 2006 and 2010, General Jim Moore was built in 5 different phases. The last phase that remains is the South Boundary Road intersection, and this is a photo of where the General Jim Moore improvements end, moving down towards Highway 218, right where the intersection would happen. And I believe I have a laser pointer here. This is where the intersection is planned. And it hasn't been built on the South Boundary Road because at the time we were waiting for the CFD funds to be raised sufficient enough that we would have the funding to complete it. And there's another issue that was identified in the EAIS, and that is here, from the end of the sidewalk through here, this little area right here, is Seaside's Bird's Beak, which is a federally listed plant. What that means is there needs to be some biological work done to identify where it's at, and various other items of work known as mitigations. Those mitigations were not defined underneath the South Boundary Road, but they were defined underneath the General Jim Moore project. And so now we've got 2 separate CEQAs for the same intersection area, and because of that, we need to be able to have a separate work order to keep everything separate. And the reason why is we want to complete the construction of the General Jim Moore CIP project and the South Boundary Road project, but we also want to meet the intent and law of the CEQA. And that's part of that way we do that is to keep the work activities aligned with the approved mitigations under a different work order and to ensure the accounting is tracked to the General Jim Moore project. So underneath this service work order, we're asking them to provide further environmental services, to complete preliminary engineering, design engineering, and miscellaneous tasks having to do with project management. Now I'm going to put a side note in here. The Master Services Agreement is one contract, but it allows us to add work orders in the future. And so some of the work orders that may come forward in the future are things having to do with construction management, roadway landscape, irrigation design, specialized consulting services, or master utility plan updates. And that all happens as we identify them as moving through the projects. So going back for the Service Work Order 5, we're asking that you authorize the Executive Order Officer to execute Service Work Order W5 for the Whitson Engineers Master Service Agreement for the preparation of planning specifications and estimates for the General Jim Moore and South Boundary Road intersection, not to exceed about $210,000. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Said? Ms. Morton.
So, earlier, we were in closed session on a matter related to approvals that we gave with regard to changes in this plan and planning on South Boundary Road and how it differed from the 2005 EIR. And my question is, this seems to be an overlapping area and/or within the confines of 2 different EIRs. Is this that's part of the November 2017 approval? This area was part of that November 2017 approval for which we're being sued. That's part of it.
I don't think so.
So I think your question is, are the 2 overlapping, South Boundary Road? No, they were coordinated. So the General Jim Moore Boulevard EAIS included this intersection. The South Boundary Road So that was in 2005 when the board certified that. In 2010, the board certified South Boundary Road environmental assessment, EAIS, initial study. And so that included from that intersection forward down South Boundary Road. So they weren't overlapping, they were coordinated, but each had their different components that met up.
I may not be remembering correctly, but it seems to me when we were talking about the CIP a couple months ago, I was looking at documents that showed that the General Jim Moore Boulevard project was completely finished. And I guess I'm wondering, am I remembering that correctly? And if so, why is this coming up now? Or is it coming up as part of the South Boundary Road part?
Sure. So FORA did get an ARA grant back in 2009 to complete much of General Jim Moore Boulevard and Eucalyptus. This intersection is part of the General Jim Moore project. It's been described in the FORA CIP as, I think, FO9C. So it's been described in the FORA CIP continuously as going to the South Boundary, to connecting to South Boundary Road. So there, it hasn't been completed because that was a section that was not part of what was contractually built with the ARA grant.
So I'm going to add some clarity here. What was completed was phases 1 through 5. So we have a notice of completion on phase 5 that was completed, but the full project itself covered underneath the CEQA has not been completed, as there's still the South Boundary Road intersection remaining.
Is there any issue with the environmental review not being current enough? Sometimes, things change and you have to do an update or something.
I don't see an issue, and our consultants haven't raised an issue at this time.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Ochoa?
When you pointed with the laser pointer at the picture of General Jim Moore, you're pointing to the place where the wide stretch of General Jim Moore ends. And I'm looking at a Google map. I see that that's where a trail sort of from the old Fort Ord comes to General Jim Moore, but the actual South Boundary Road is some ways down. So does this intersection project include widening that remaining stretch and connecting to the existing South Boundary Road, or is it actually rerouting South Boundary Road to meet General Jim Moore north of where it is now?
It's the latter. We're rerouting South Boundary Road up above one of the habitat parcels to connect to General Jim Moore. It only moves it about 300 feet to the north. That does a number of things. One, it helps further the habitat component of it. The second part is that there's a blind curve that hits into a hill, and so for safety reasons you want that intersection more at a flat so there's enough visibility ahead of the vehicles to be able to deal with the intersection. That might be too much of the detail. The second part, I believe, of what you were asking is that there is an approach from 218 down here up to the intersection that will be upgraded, is what it'll be. It won't be widened out to the same General Jim Moore width, but it'll be upgraded to handle that intersection.
I think it should be noted, to answer your question, that it isn't part of this project to reroute South Boundary Road. That was looked at in a separate item. This intersection, though, will be affixed at the point where South Boundary Road is realigned.
Ms. Adams?
Yes, can you tell me, just from the picture.
Microphone.
Is it going to be an intersection or is it going to be a roundabout?
That's a good question. One of the things we're asking the engineer to do is to assess the feasibility of a roundabout. Seaside, Del Rey Oaks, and Monterey have asked us to do that, asked FORA to do that. This work order includes a feasibility study as part of the design. Once that feasibility study is completed, we'll take a closer look at it, and we'll look at the cost-benefit analysis, and we'll assess which one is better for the region, and we'll move forward on the best solution for the region.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Connell.
Thank you. As to the rerouting of southbound, which comes first? Or do they both happen at the same time, the roundabout or the rerouting of the road?
So we're currently working out with the engineers the phasing process. There's some discussion about how the phasing will work, and the phasing ties to how the MEC cleanup, or there's not cleanup, how we handle the residual MEC, the soils management plan, and the construction support plan. Once those are detailed out, then the engineer is able to understand how to phase the project. And so there will be different steps as we move forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
I
Chair.
think it'd be appropriate to add, Frank, that the realignment of South Boundary Road also helps to comply with the regional parks issue in that area. The city of Del Rio set aside additional land for regional parks, and this allows that land to be contiguous with the frog pond and other habitat areas.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Said? Any questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll bring it back.
Move approval.
There's a motion to approve. There's a second. Is there any other discussion on the second?
I just wanted to comment on the motion. So I will not be supporting the motion because I don't have sufficient clarity from what was referenced in response to my questions. When we're bootstrapping it sounded as if we were bootstrapping two EIRs from two different projects and changes in a roundabout, changes in rerouting. Nobody's answered the questions how this interrelates with the approval we made in November, whereby we're being sued because we varied a project from what was in these EIRs. So I am going to be voting against this. Not that I don't want this to happen, but I don't want to be sued. I need some further clarification.
Okay.
This gets a little frustrating, to say the least. We just had a meeting earlier today where Delray Oaks, after 2020, we're trying to provide CFD fees in excess of $20 million. And those fees would be going to helping all the jurisdictions, the 5 land use jurisdictions, CSU, and B, and MPC. To be able to do that, we have to develop our land, which means South Boundary Road has to be upgraded and this intersection has to be done. Now we have at least one member of the board here saying they're going to vote against it. Why? Another delay. Another delay and another delay. The same member, with all due respect, has voted no, the only single member voting no on just about everything having to do with South Boundary Road or with regard to anything of the Delray Oaks parcel. I've supported Marina's request. I supported the breaking down the stockade. I could have voted no too, delay that project a month, delay every other project in Marina a month. I won't go there. I think being professional, if you have the majority of people here and realizing we have 2 votes here, that if it looks like the majority are going in a different direction, let's get the job done and stop the delaying tactics. It just gets frustrating as heck that we're here month after month after month doing the same thing over again, month after month, because one individual was trying to stop a project that will provide eventually $20 million that will actually help that person's jurisdiction.
Okay, if there's no other...
Well, I'd
No,
like
go
to
ahead.
weigh in on that.
Yes.
We're talking about this board is supposed to take a regional approach looking for everybody, not just for Marina, not just for Delray Oaks. And we keep seeing this time and time again, anything we can do to just slow it down. And then we're completely complaining about why FORA haven't got more done. We should have had these in the reverse order, I think, so we could have played tit for tat.
That characterization is just so inappropriate, and the negative personal attacks on Councilwoman Morton is just simply not justified. She's voting the way she thinks is appropriate. Of all the people sitting on this board, you won't find a person, in my opinion, who has educated herself so much relating to the various documents. She certainly doesn't need my support to defend herself, but she's being professional in that she's remaining quiet. But the personal attack is just below this board. I'm very disappointed with that. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Garfield.
Thank you. Let's figure out a solution.
And I hear you on the we don't want to be sued. I absolutely hear you on as we want to take an action where all our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed. Can you please move us forward in what exactly is it that gives you the reservation on this particular issue so that we can spend an appropriate amount of time getting a resolution for it, for your doubt?
So the issues that were raised that are now the subject of a writ, maybe the city attorney, I don't have a copy of the lawsuit, but the decisions that we made, what we were being challenged on is our compliance with CEQA when we approved decisions based on these EIRs. Particularly with regard to the south boundary, there was a change, and one block or an intersection, and I'm sorry that I am not as articulate. I don't have the documents, nor have I ever been provided the, that's not my job. That's this gentleman's job. But I do note that after 20 years is that 1 month delay to make sure that we're in compliance. I am not making this objection because of delay. I am making this objection because we have paid $2.75 million recently for a judgment where we did not comply with CEQA. We were challenged. And I'm just trying to be sure that we are together. So when at a staff, at a report level, to say we're bootstrapping 2 CEQA reviews for this, it's a red flag for me, because CEQA is tied to a project. And maybe I am too analytical, that's my training, but that's something that so far nobody has been able to clarify for me.
Okay,
If I
may
could-
I? May
yes.
I? Before we devolve into something that we don't want to, I will say this, is that the characterization that we're bootstrapping 2 EIRs is incorrect. Staff was very articulate in pointing out that this is part of the original General Jim Moore plan and EIR, separate from the South Boundary Road. The issues with the South Boundary Road are to the east end of the issue of that road. There was a 200 or 300 foot squabble over, how it was described. And staff at that time said that it was the exact same language out of the CEQA document. And we got sued anyways. But this is a totally separate project. It's not a bootstrapping. It's not a combination of projects. It is the General Jim Moore project. Just the intersection, the last intersection that is being addressed here. So I don't know how much more plainly staff could say it. They're 2 separate items. This is General Jim Moore. South Boundary Road happens to connect to it, but it, as was mentioned by staff, the South Boundary project goes from the intersection east. So that's my understanding, and I think that's what staff said. Ms. Garfield, Mr. Moore.
Okay, I want to follow up on a discrepancy I'm hearing, is that when staff said that the placement of the intersection was changed by realigning South Boundary Road for sight lines and safety, and one of the benefits of that was creating the possibility of contiguousness for some open space. Is that changing of the routing a change in the project? And secondarily, if there...
We'll let staff
Okay.
answer that question.
The answer to that question is no.
Okay, how come not? Because it sounds like it is.
The 2 roads were coordinated in their environmental review and the definition of the project. So with General Jim Moore Boulevard, it identified these, and Peter showed the quotation from the document, but identified the project description included these intersections, and the bottom lowest intersection is South Boundary Road. It doesn't describe what kind of intersection it has to be, whether it has to be a roundabout or a controlled intersection. So
Okay.
that's the reason for the feasibility
But
study.
the location of it is somewhat flexible as well? Or,
And so so both projects were conceptually looked at from the same engineering firm back then as Cregan and D'Angelo. So they looked at was the best design for South Boundary Road ahead of time, and that we knew a realignment would be needed to deal with the habitat concerns of that were just north of existing South Boundary Road, and also, as Peter mentioned, the safety of the intersection, having a flatter piece of land with a clear line of sight. So that was the reason for the realignment of 300 feet of
so,
South Boundary Road.
so the realignment was the plan,
Yes.
not subsequent to an approved plan? Okay. Thank you. I hope that hits the high points.
Mr. Moore.
So perhaps what was at least this was a little bit confusing to me when it was stated that South Boundary Road, that General Jim Moore Boulevard consisted of 5 phases, and we've completed all 5 phases. And now we have something, but it wasn't mentioned as a 6th phase. We've got this thing we didn't complete. So is this intersection part of phase 5 and we didn't finish phase 5? Or is this intersection phase 6, but it wasn't called phase 6? And of course, Director Garfield has really kind of hit the nose on the head. Is this intersection in its location as conceived to be approved today potentially, or next month as the case may be, as it was described in the original EIR, which was approved for General Jim Moore Boulevard?
Staff, would you like to answer that question? Again.
So I can flip back to that slide. Sorry. So in the General Jim Moore Boulevard project, sorry, jumping back. Okay, this is the description of the project that describes the portion of the description that describes the intersections. So the General Jim Moore Boulevard project included the intersection with South Boundary Road. There was not a definition, there were not plans that were submitted with the environmental review in terms of 30% drawings or 60% drawings. What was included was conceptual design of General Jim Moore Boulevard. This intersection was part of that. So it looked at, within the project description, rights of way of how far the project could go. It didn't design the intersection at that point. So that's the project that was approved, was the conceptual.
Okay.
And the location of the intersection is at this current, where we're proposing the design for the engineers to continue would be consistent with that approval of the project in this location.
Okay, and the other part of the question was which phase is this part of?
So General Jim Moore Boulevard was broken down into phases. This is completion of the final phase of it.
Phase 5.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Just one quick follow-up, I suppose, for council. So that wording, an argument could be made from that wording that this intersection is supposed to be where the existing South Boundary Road intersects General Jim Moore. And if I understand correctly, we now want to move that 300 feet further north. Not the case?
No.
It was in the original conceptual drawings when the EIR was done, was the realigned.
It included the realignment
Right.
of South Boundary. Got it. Thank you.
So I have a question of a slightly different sort, but so at the county, we're dealing with a situation where we have a 4-way intersection where a possible roundabout is proposed, and what I've been told is that if we proceed with the roundabout, we need to do an addendum to the EIR. So my question now is, if we're looking at the design of this intersection, and it's been described as an intersection, but it might be a roundabout, at what point do we do an addendum to the EIR, or do we need to accommodate the possible change in design at the intersection?
So to answer that question, it depends on the meets and bounds of the project description, that conceptual alignment of General Jim Moore Boulevard. If you exceed the limits of that, then you would need to do additional CEQA or CEQA addendum of one sort or another.
And that would emerge, the need for that would emerge as part of the feasibility study?
Correct.
Okay, are there any further questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. We'll take a roll call vote.
Director Rubio,
Yes.
Director Parker,
Yes.
Director Adams, Director Phillips, Director O'Connell, Director Albert,
Yes.
Director Reimers,
Yes.
Director Edelen, Director Morton, Director Carbone,
Yes.
Director Garfield.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is a public comment period. Public comment is now open.
Good afternoon, Friday the 13th. I thought I would come here today and wish you all a good Friday the 13th. I see it's needed. We foresaw this years ago. One of our biggest battles and one of the most terrible times we had was arguing with our state senator in regards to what regional governments do amongst its individual jurisdictions. And I'll remind one of the jurisdictions that if it wasn't for that fight we put forward and getting in his office in Sacramento and exchanging construction niceties, you wouldn't have 2 votes. And you wouldn't be where you are right now, because the politics at the time wouldn't have allowed you to get ahead to the point you are. So having said all that, I want to present you with a policy that you adopted many years ago. It really hasn't been in use because of several reasons. The original lawsuit actually getting developers to recognize, and governments, by the way, that, yeah, prevailing wage is supposed to be paid on projects within the FORA jurisdiction. The policy is meant to basically develop a skilled and trained workforce for the area. In its first section, it actually states that FORA encourages the jurisdictions to adopt it and implement it. But in the second section, it goes on to make certain requirements known. We have a list of 75 individuals, or I will actually at the end of the month, that would very much like to begin their careers in construction within the area which they live to provide for their families. We have students that fall within Section 5. We've worked with the Monterey Workforce Investment Board, and actually the Santa Cruz and the San Benito Investment Boards, and Salinas High School, with Mission Trails people, to identify and educate individuals in regards to opportunities in construction. We'd like to move forward with this. And so I will ask Mr. Hulamard that we discuss this, and I will present him with the list, and we will see what we can do. So again, happy Friday the 13th, everyone. It's nice to be here, and I'm certainly glad I wasn't here earlier today. Thank you. I will watch the video.
Okay, there being no further public comment, items from members. I would like to adjourn this meeting in memory of Bishop Garcia and a longtime FORA, Fort Ord reuse advocate and worker, Mr. Dick Globers, who passed away last week. Kathleen Lee's father. He's in fact actually being interred right now. But I'd like for us to adjourn in their memory. And we stand adjourned. Thank you.